Salvete omnes. This is Gai Iuli Caesaris Commentarii de Bello Gallico Liber Primus, chapter 22. And Caesar writes, Prima luce, cum summus mons a labieno teneretur, ipse ab hostium casris non longius mille et quingentis passibus abesset, neque, ut postea ex captivis comperit, aut ipsius adventus, aut labieni cognitus esset, considius, equad misso, ad eum accurrit, dicit montem, quem a labieno occupari voluerit, ab hostibus teneri. And we'll stop here at the colon. Awesome, it just keeps going. All right, prima. From primus a Technically, this is a superlative. It means first, the earliest one. So first, with lux, lucus, feminine, light, luce being the ablative, with the ablative singular feminine prima, we have at first light. This is an ablative of time when. We can say at dawn. You could say at first light if you want, and keep it literal. At dawn, at daybreak. And then we have cum. And you have to decide whether this is preposition cum, meaning with, takes the ablative, or conjunction cum, meaning when, since, or although. And then we go to summus mons, and we get, okay, so this is not cum with the ablative. This is conjunction cum, so when, since, although. So I'm going to plug and chug, start with when. When, we'll start with the temporal. When summus, so summus the top of. Remember, it doesn't take the genitive, it's an adjective. The of is part of the translation. Summus, the top of. Mons, montis, masculine. Hill, mountain, a mount. So it's summus mons, that's the top of the mountain, the height of the hill. Ab, preposition meaning from, away from, takes the ablative, showing separation, movement away from. Labieno, Titus Labienus, T-Lab, Caesar's second in command. This is the ablative of Labienus e masculine. So the ablative labieno, ablative singular masculine, ablative of separation with the preposition we are moving away from Labienus, or it could be ab, personal agent, by Labienus. So Labienus is the agent, the personal agent, if we have a passive voice verb. Oh, look, we have a passive voice verb. Teneo, teneri, tenui, tentus, to have, to hold, to grasp, to keep. This is the third person singular. Notice it is imperfect. There's tenere, the second principal part, the infinitive, the present active infinitive, and then the tur, third person singular, imperfect passive subjunctive, going with the conjunction cum. So it could be when, it could be since, it could be although. When the height of the hill was being held. So if we have a dependent subjunctive clause, this cum clause here, this cum temporal clause, if it's in the imperfect subjunctive, that means that we are in secondary sequence. And our main verb will be a past tense, either a perfect tense, translate ed, or it will be an imperfect tense or a pluperfect tense. So when the top of the hill, the height of the hill, was being held by Labienus, the imperfect subjunctive is used in secondary sequence to show an action that is either contemporaneous, meaning happening at the same time, or subsequent, meaning happening after. So while the height of the hill is currently being held by Labienus, then another action happened. Ipse, you can go ahead and put an et right here. I mean, our editor gives us a comma. You can go ahead and put an et if you'd like. It chops us up here. There's a little bit of asyndeton here, where Caesar doesn't use any syndeta, any connective conjunctions to connect these two. So at daybreak, when the height of the hill was being held by Labienus, and ipse refers to Caesar, the emphatic pronoun or the intensive pronoun. He himself, Caesar, the very man, he himself, ab, we had this before with here it was working with an ablative of personal agent with a passive voice verb. This same preposition, but here it's being used with an ablative of separation. So, castris, from the camp, hostium genitive plural, of the enemy. Hostis, hostis masculine, public enemy, and castris, castra, aurum, always neuter, always plural. This is going to be ablative separation, working with ab, whereas this was ablative of personal agent, working with the ablative of personal agent labieno. And then this one is separation, from the enemy camp. We're moving away from the enemy camp, where there's some distance between us and the enemy camp. Non, adverb not. Longius, this is the comparative adverb of longus aum. So longius. So not more than, not farther than, not farther than. Mille. Mille is 1,000, indeclinable adjective mille. Et quingentis. Quingentis means 500, and it's ablative and plural. So it's 1,500 passibus. A passus us, make run over the u in the genitive singular. Masculine is a pace, which is 2 strides, as in it's like 2 longish steps. It's equivalent to about 5 feet, and then 1,000 of them make a mile. So mille. That's how we get mile, mille. It's 1,000 of these 5-foot paces. Passus, a step or a pace. So this is all of this right here is ablative. Mille is indeclinable. It's just going to agree with passibus. It doesn't change its form. And et quingentis, this is ablative. It's agreeing with passibus, 500 paces. So you can say 1.5 miles. A mille passus is a mile. Quingentis, 1.5 miles, 1.5 miles. Not farther than 1.5 miles, abesset. Third person singular, imperfect active subjunctive. Absum, abesse, a fui, a futurus. Away, to be absent from. So check out abesse, abesse, ab with the ablative separation. So whereas the height of the hill, while the height of the hill was being held by Labienus, at that same time, while, temporal clause, Caesar himself was, see that esset? Just it's imperfect subjunctive, third person singular, just like teneretur is third person subjunctive. I'm sorry, is imperfect subjunctive. Was from the enemy camp, not more than 1.5 miles away. So we're setting up the scene here. At daybreak, at dawn, the plan was, at dawn, Labienus was going to come from the top of the mountain, from the high ground, and Caesar, the rest of the forces, were going to surround the camp at the low ground, where the camp was. So we're going to do a pincer move, coming from the high ground and from the level ground. So he set this up that Labienus, the height of the hill, was being held by Labienus, while he himself was not farther than 1.5 miles from the enemy camp. So he's pretty close. You don't want to get too close too soon because the enemy will wake up and see you. Neque. Now neque stands in for et non. You typically don't see et non. So you would see neque or neck. And they can be correlatives, so you can have neck and neque, neither nor. Neque by itself can mean nor, or can just be and not. Like I said, it stands in for et non. Et non and not, nor, ut postea ex captivis comperet, ut plus the indicative, comperire, means to find out. As he finds out, comperet ex captivis. I'm sorry, as he found out. Comperet. This is just as with the subjunctive. I'm sorry, with the indicative. Ut plus the indicative as. not so that. Ud plus the subjunctive is so that. Ud plus the indicative can mean how, it can mean as, it can mean when, it can mean since. It's kind of a catch-all conjunction, coordinating conjunction, because it introduces a subordinate clause. So we have postea, and afterwards, as he learned from captives. So Caesar's putting this parenthetical aside. You can put parentheses around this if you would like, to explain how he knows this information. As he learned from captives afterwards, he learned from captives, aut ipsius adventus, and then its correlative is this other aut labieni cognitus esset. And not, as he learned afterwards from captives, was or had out either ipsius adventus, the adventus us masculine, the arrival, the advent. Ipsius once again stands in for Caesar. So this is ipsius, it's a heteroclite. What'd you call me? So its genitive singular is ius, eus. Its dative singular would be an I, ipsi. So this is stands in for the genitive Caesaris. This is genitive singular masculine. Whereas ipse, Caesar, this is Caesaris as well. It's referring back to Caesar. Either the arrival of himself, either Caesar's arrival, his own arrival, out, or the adventus of the genitive labieni, of Labienus. Cognitus esset, from cognosco, cognoscere, cognovi, cognitus. This is the third person singular, and it's pluperfect passive subjunctive. Cognitus, us, you can tell that the subject is masculine. It's adventus. You can tell by the us. So adventus, the arrival, had been known, had been learned of or discovered. Whose arrival? Ipsius, that stands in for Caesaris, his own arrival. Or Labieni, or Labienus's arrival, cognitus esset, had been known. And remember, this entire thing is being cast with a negative, neque. And not, and it was not so, as he learned from captives afterwards, that either his own arrival or Labienus's had been learned of, had been cognitus esset, the arrival had been discovered. Meaning that later on, after this battle is concluded, Caesar questioned the Helvetians, captives from the battle, and he said, so, did you guys know that I had my second lieutenant, my second in command, my lieutenant, Labienus, on the top of the hill above your camp while I was going to sneak up at dawn? And the captives said, oh my goodness, no, we had no idea. Ha! I would have had you, but I did not. Well, what happened? Well, here's what happened. Considious. Yes. So this is going to be the main clause. We have not had a main verb yet. It's going to be accurret. Considious accurret. So Caesar's done a nice job of sort of painting this scene. He's given us the time. It's daybreak. You can see sort of the sun peeking out from over the horizon. At that time, the top of the hill, it's being held by Labienus. While the top of the hill is being held by Labienus, Caesar himself was not farther than 1.5 miles from the enemy camp. And not, as he afterwards learned from captives, was his or Labienus's arrival learned of, discovered, or known of. When all that was going on, while all that was going on, all these are subjunctive because they're working with this cum. Cum teneretur, cum abesset, cum cognitus esset. Notice cognitus esset is pluperfect because the arrival had not been known of when the next part happens. When considius, equo admisso ad eum accurret. Considius, he's our subject. Considius, he's the veteran of Sulla's army and Crassus's army, whom we learned in the previous chapter, in chapter 21. Equo admisso, equus e masculine. This is a horse, of course. Nay. And admitto, admittere, admissi, admissus. So, taken together, this is an ablative absolute. with horse having been sent forth. This is the Latin for at full gallop. With horse spurned on. Just write at full gallop. With horse spurned on. Considius, with horse spurned on. Considius, at full gallop. Meaning he was kicking that horse rather hard in order to get it to gallop quickly, ad eum, to him, to, this stands in for Caesarem, to him, to Caesar, and then accurret. Now you can say that Considius ran to Caesar. You know, it's curro, currere, cucurri, cursus with ad. He ad currit, ad eum. He ran towards to him. Romans and you prepositions and prefixes. Now, we could change accurret not just to run to, but he didn't Considius gallop. Considius galloped to him, we could say, at full speed. Or, I mean, it seems kind of odd to say Considius ran to him at full gallop. Considius hastened to him at full gallop. Considius galloped to him at full speed. And he dicit montem, another case of ascendaton, where there's no et. It should be accurret et. Probably a reason for the ascendatonage in this selection is it speeds up your reading, heightens the drama, the vividness of the action. Considius, he gallops to Caesar at full speed, and he says that the montem dicit, he says that, dico, king of indirect statement, that, remember your subject is going to be in the accusative, in the indirect statement. The verb is going to be an infinitive. If we have a subordinate clause, like say a relative clause, inside of our indirect statement, the verb will be in the subjunctive, just to remind you that you're inside the indirect statement. So montem, mons montes masculine, it's that hill that we're talking about, the one that Labienus supposedly has. So Considius, this old dude, how old is Considius, by the way? So he rushes to Caesar at full gallop and says that the hill, montem, and this is going to be the accusative subject of the indirect statement, quem, which, remember that a relative pronoun must agree with its antecedent in gender and number and not necessarily in case. So if this is accusative, quem does not have to be accusative, but it is. It has to be singular, it has to be masculine to agree with montem, which is singular and masculine. So quem is going to be some sort of accusative-y thing, direct object or something like that, inside of the indirect statement. Quem a labieno, a ab, preposition from or away from, or as we saw up here, could be by, meaning agent. Labieno, okay, so it's the ablative of labienos. So from Labienus or by Labienus, like it was up here. Occupari, notice this is very similar to up here, but instead of using teneo, like we did up here, we're using occupo, occupare, occupavi, occupatus. This is the present passive infinitive, which the hill, which by Labienus to be seized, to be taken. Present passive infinitive. And why do we have an infinitive here? Because it's working off volueret, from volo, velle, volui. Like I said, if we have a subordinate clause, like a relative clause, inside our indirect statement, starting with montem, this is what Labienus says to Caesar, that the hill which, subordinate, he, meaning Caesar, wished. Now, this is a perfect subjunctive to show a prior action to this dicit. This dicit is acting like a present tense. It's probably more correctly a historical present. He says that the hill which he wished, wanted, shows a prior action to when Labienus, when Labienus says to Caesar. When Labienus says that the hill, when Labienus is talking about this hill, Caesar has already wished it to be seized by Labienus. He wished quem it to be seized by Labienus. So Considius says that the hill which he, Caesar, wished to be seized by Labienus, ob hostibus, ab, from, away from, or ablative of personal agent by. Hostibus, the ablative of hostis, hostis masculine, the enemy, either separation from or personal agent by. Teneri, and passive, and this is like up here, only instead of a labieno teneretur, now the montem is ab hostibus teneri, that the hill, the montem, is being held by the enemy. Which hill? The one which he wished to be seized by Labienus. So this is an ablative personal agent, and tenere is a present passive infinitive. This is the main verb of our indirect statement because it's infinitive and it's present tense, so it's happening contemporaneous to the verb which introduces the indirect statement. So Considius runs up to Caesar and he says that the hill is currently being held by the enemy. Caesar's like, wait, which hill? The one which he wished to be seized by Labienus. And Caesar's confused. That is quite the opposite of what I ordered Labienus to do. And Considius is like, id se ag Gallicis armis atque insignibus cogno we say. So id, it's equivalent to English it. Change the D to a T. It's either the nominative or accusative singular neuter of is ea. It's this thing, that thing. It's the pronoun of reference. So we're referring to something. We're not giving the location of the thing. It's a demonstrative, but we're just referring to something, pointing something out. It's referring to this thing that he just talked about. So this thing, that the hill, it's this whole thing. It is referring to the montem, the hill being held by the enemy instead of Labienus. This thing, it, what he just said, say is referring to Considius. It's the reflexive. You should be able to circle the reflexive and draw an arrow back to the subject. The subject being the subject of the indirect statement. We're still inside the indirect statement. This is still what he's telling Caesar. He says that he, over say, you can write considium. This is the accusative subject of the indirect statement, that Considius, he himself, Considius, the very man, Considius says that he himself, the same dude, did something to it, meaning the information that the hill is being held by the enemy. So Considius is our subject. Oh, wow, we've seen this word a lot. It is all over the place here. So separation or personal agent. Gallicis armis, Gallicus aum, Gallic, Gaulish, and it goes with armis, from arma, aurum, always neuter, always plural. So from Gallic arms or by Gallic arms. Atque, and also even. It's like if et went to the gym. You'll see atque if the next word starts with a vowel, like the letter I. If the next word starts with a consonant, you'll have ac. Insignibus, these are sort of, wow, can't think. Insignia, I guess, would be the English word. Didn't want to go for the low-hanging fruit there. Insignia, ensigns, these are signs which are emblazoned upon someone's arms so you know for whom they fight. You know which side they're on. So you can say insignia. Gallic arms and insignia, because the Gauls have a certain style of armor, and they also emblazon their arms with certain styles and certain devices, certain pictures, colors, insignia, so you know which tribe they're fighting for, on whose side they're on. And then cogno, we say. We've also seen this verb before. It was up here. It's cognosco, cognoscere, cognovi, cognitus, to find out, to learn. And cogno, we say, is the perfect active infinitive. And we are still inside the indirect statement, so it shows an action which is prior to the main verb. So Considius is telling this to Caesar. So imagine this old Roman soldier Considius is talking to Caesar, and he says to Caesar, he says, that the hill is currently being held by the enemy. Oh, wow, that's terrible, Caesar says. I know. Well, how do you know that? And he says, say, Considius, he himself says that he, cognovisse, he had learned this, he had discovered, he had figured this thing out. This is the direct object of cognovisse, that he had figured this out. I had already figured this out before I'm telling you this right now. I figured this thing out from, so I guess it's ablative of personal agent, from the Gallic arms and the insignia. So when Considius looked out with his old Roman soldier eyes, how old is this guy, towards this hill to see if Labienus is still on top of this hill ready to spring the trap, and instead he's like, oh no! He sees Gallic arms, Gallic weapons, Gallic armor, and insignia. And he supposes that the hill is no longer in possession of the Romans, that the enemy has taken the hill. Therefore, the trap won't work, and we should call off the attack. Great sentence. Look at all that. And with the period, we end the indirect statement as well as the sentence. So altogether, at dawn, while the height of the hill was being held by Labienus, and he himself was not farther than 1.5 miles from the enemy camp, and not, as he learns later from captives, was his own or Labienus's arrival discovered. Considius galloped to him at full speed, and said that the hill, which he wished to be taken by Labienus, was currently being held by the enemy. He had learned of this by their Gallic arms and insignia. Okay, Caesar, suas copias in proximum collem subducit, Acciam instruit. A nice short sentence. Look at that, Caesar. It's effective. What he do in response? Suas copias. Okay, we have suas, suasaum to go with copias, copiae, aurum. If it's plural, this feminine noun will usually refer to forces or troops, especially in military language. So whose forces? Suas, his own. The reflexive possessive adjective, you can circle the su part and draw an arrow to the subject. And so whose forces are they? You can take the os part, the ending, and underline it as well as the noun. So the os part, the ending, that links it up with kopios, the noun. And then the su part links it up with Caesar. So whose forces are they? They are Caesar's forces, his own. So Caesar did something to his own forces because they're accusative direct object of the verb. In plus the accusative shows motion towards, into or onto. Proximum, from proximosaum, it's a superlative of prope. The comparative is propius, nearer. Proximus is the superlative, nearest, closest, or next to. He'll take a dative if you're next to something, dative with adjective, but here it's just modifying collem, which is another word for hill. Collis, masculine, third declension masculine, and it's an I stem. In onto the nearest hill, subducit. Subducit means that he draws away from, or he draws up. Caesar leads up to, sub, leads his own forces up to the nearest hill. Caesar leads his own forces up to the nearest hill. So Caesar finds his own high ground, thinking that the trap has been ruined. He's about ready to fight. Acciam instruit. Notice also a syndeton. Lack of a conjunction here. There's no et. And he did this. Once again, it's used to heighten the action. So Caesar, he draws his forces away and up on the nearest hill, and then Acciam instruit. And he drew up his battle line. He set up his Acciam, his battle array. So he got his forces into position. He put them probably into some form of the triplex Accies, the trifold battle formation. Labienus, ut erat ei praeceptum a Caesare, ne proelium committeret, nisi ipsius copiae prope hostium casra visae essent, ut undique uno tempore in hostes impetus fieret, monte occupato nosros expectabat, prolioque abstinebat. Nice. Another great sentence. So Labienus. What'd Labienus do? T-Lab, what are you up to? Thought you were supposed to take that hill. Ut. Erat e praeceptum. Now take erat praeceptum together as praeceptum erat with ut. As erat praeceptum, and then ei is nestled snugly between them because it's the dative that goes with this verb. Now, a verb like praecipio, praecipio, praecipere, praecepi, praeceptus, to take beforehand, can also mean to command or to order. It takes the dative because it's a compound verbs usually take dative as their objects. They're intransitive. So if you order someone, it could be praecipio and then the dative. Now, if the verb is in the passive, if someone is ordered by means of this verb, that person is still going to be in the dative. The subject is going to be an impersonal it. These intransitive verbs, their subjects become it, a third person singular neuter. Their objects are still dative. So Labienus, as he had been ordered a Caesare, ablative of personal agent, by Caesar. Literally, it's saying Labienus, as it had been ordered to him by Caesar. These intransitive verbs, they still take the dative. They still have to take the dative. It's just their subject switches to a third person singular impersonal neuter. Go ahead and translate it the way English does it. Labienus, as he had been ordered by Caesar. Ne proelium committeret. And what had he been ordered not to do? We need to have an indirect command, a substantive clause of purpose. But instead of ut, we have ne to show what Caesar commanded him not to do, so that he may not, lest he committeret proelium. Latin idiom proelium committere means to join battle. It's that moment where the two forces race together and then clash. To join battle, to start battle. Labienus, this is ut as, because it takes the indicative, as he had been commanded by Caesar not to join battle, as he had been commanded by Caesar lest he join battle, so that he not join battle. It's what Caesar commanded him not to do. Don't join battle. Nisi ipsius copiae prope. Nisi is unless, if not. Go ahead and translate it. Unless ipsius, we had this before, Swandam heteroclats, this is the genitive, of himself, it refers to Caesar, Caesaris, of himself, copiae, the forces, nominative plural feminine, copiae aurum feminine plural, unless his own forces, the forces of himself, unless Caesar's forces, prope, nearby, next to, takes the accusative, hostium, that's not accusative, that's a genitive plural, hostis, hostis. Castra is the accusative, which goes with prope. So near the camp of the enemy, near the enemy camp. Genitive plural, possession. Castra going with prope, it's the accusative. Near the enemy camp, unless his own forces near the enemy camp, visai essent, from video, videre, vidi, visus, visai. It's visai, plural feminine, to go with copiae. So nominative plural feminine. The forces essent had been seen. Third person plural, pluperfect, passive subjunctive. Nisi, unless his own forces had been seen near the camp. That was when otherwise Labienus is not to join battle. So Labienus, as he had been commanded by Caesar not to join battle, unless his own, that is Caesar's own forces, had been seen near the enemy camp. And why would that be? Ut, so that. This is an adverbial purpose clause introduced by ut. Undique. Undique is an adverb. It means on all sides or from all sides. But winners translate undique as all gates. A-L-G-A-T-E-S. So all gates, as in on all gates, on all sides. Winners also can translate this adverb as every whence. So that every whence, meaning from everywhere, on all sides, uno tempore, unus aum goes with tempus temporis neuter, time. This is an ablative of time when, ablative singular neuter, at one time. You could even say at the same time, kind of stands in for simul, like simultaneously. So that, in order to, every whence, all gates, on all sides, if you're lame, uno tempore, at one time, at the same time, at once, in, plus the accusative would show motion towards, into or onto, or against, hostes, against the enemy, impetus. So impetus, os, macron over the u in the genitive singular, masculine, it means an attack, a quick motion forward. And an attack, fieret, fio, fieri, factus sum, semi-deponent. This verb, fio, acts as the passive of facio. So we have the idiom impetum facere in plus the accusative, which means to make an attack upon an accusative in. Here, though, we have the passive of facio. So not someone is going to make an impetum, a direct object impetum, an attack upon an accusative. Here, an attack in the nominative is being made. This verb is it looks active, right? But remember, fio, fieri, factus sum is a semi-deponent, and it serves as the passive of facio. An attack might be made in, upon, against the enemy, on all sides, all gates, every whence, from everywhere, and at the same time, at once. That was why Labienus, that's why Caesar commanded Labienus not to join battle unless he saw Caesar's forces near the enemy camp. It was so that the attack could happen, could be done, could be carried out against the enemy on all sides and at the same time. Monte occupato. Now all of that interrupted, as he had done Labienus, as he had been ordered by Caesar to blah blah blah, to do da da, to do da da da, and here we pick up with the main clause again. So Labienus, we switch our gears over to him. We talk about why he's up there, what he had been commanded to do, and what was the purpose of him being there. And now we're going to figure out what happened to him. Monte, mons montis, masculine, hill in the ablative with occupato. Here we have an ablative absolute. Occupo, occupare, occupave, occupatus. This is the perfect passive participle in the ablative singular masculine to agree with Monte. With the noun, then translate the participle. With the noun participle. With the hill having been seized. With the hill seized. Having seized the hill. When he had seized the hill. After he had seized the hill. So remember, you can take a rough translation of an ablative absolute and draw it out into a more elaborate temporal clause or causal clause, concessive clause, or conditional clause translation. Here it'd probably be best to translate it temporally. So with the hill having been taken. So after he had taken the hill. He had already taken the hill when he was nostros expectabat, when he, third person singular, imperfect, active, indicative, he was expecto, expectate, expectave, expectatus, was waiting for the direct object nostros, noster, nostra, nostrum, our, belonging to us. You don't need the viros. This is a fine substantive adjective on its own. So direct object. He was awaiting our men. And the que, the enclitic que, translates before the word to which it is attached, and he abstinebat abstineo. He was absteneo, keeping away, abstaining from, ablative, there's the ab, from battle, proilio. He doesn't put the ab, but he puts it as a prefix there. He was abstaining from battle. So actually, TLAB is doing exactly what Caesar ordered him to do. It's Considius that done goofed. Labienus, as he had been commanded by Caesar not to join battle unless his own forces had been sighted, had been seen near the enemy camp, so that every whence and at once the attack might be carried out upon the enemy, was awaiting our men and abstaining from battle after taking the hill, with the hill having been taken. So TLAB just chilling, doing what he's supposed to do. Oh, Considius. So sad. You hate to see it. Multo, from multus aum, much, plural, many, agrees with die, with denique, nicely interrupting them. Denique means finally, at last. At last, multo die, dies a masculine, die is the ablative, time when. Denique, adverb, at last, multo die, late in the day. Literally, at much day. We'd say late in the day. So the surprise has been ruined. The attack was supposed to be carried out just after dawn, and didn't happen. Late in the day. Per exploratores, through scouts, Caesar cognovit, et montem a suis teneri, et Helvetios castramovisse, et considium timore perterritum, quod non vidisset proviso sibi renuntiavisse. Ah, so sad. So through scouts, finally late in the day, through scouts, Caesar cognovit. There's your boy, nominative singular masculine, Caesar cognovit. Caesar learned, the third person singular perfect active indicative of cognosco. It's like the third time we've had this verb. It's right there, and that's also right there. Caesar learned. A lot of learning is going on, but not a lot of knowing, I guess. Accurate reconnaissance. Caesar learned through scouts late in the day. Et, and then it's correlative with this et, and then it's also correlative with this et. So Caesar learns three things. He learns the montem a suis teneri. He learns the Helvetios castramovisse. And finally, he learns the considium timore perterritum, etc. Great place for in Oxford comma. He learns thing X, comma. He learns thing Y, comma. And he learns thing Z. What does he learn? Indirect statement, oratio obliqua. He learned that montem, subject accusative of the indirect statement, mons, montis, masculine, that the hill, ab, plus suis teneri. You're not going to see a suis viris, just like you're not going to see nostros viros. This is by his own. We've seen this up here where we had a plus personal agent plus teneo, and then we had it here, personal agent, ablative, teneo, and again here, personal agent, teneo. It's teneri like it is right here because it's currently being held, that the hill is currently being held by his own. So not a postibus, but a suis, by his own. Remember, you can circle the su part and draw an arrow back to the subject, Caesar, and then you can underline the east part and have it linked to, nothing, viris. So it's from his own people, his own men. He learned that the hill is being held by his own men, a suis viris, and he learned that the Helvetios, new subject accusative, castra movisse, castra movere, to move camp, to break camp, and that they moise. So this is tenere is present because it's a contemporaneous action with this main verb cognovit. He learned that the hill is still currently being held by his men, and that the Helvetians have already, perfect tense, prior action to Caesar learning about it. They've already moved on. The Helvetians have already broken camp. And that Considius, and this is a subject accusative, new subject accusative, timore, ablative, this is ablative of cause, because of fear, timor, timoris masculine, it works off of perteritum. He was terrified by fear. Yeah? What else would you be scared? I mean, I guess, sure. Just go ahead and say he was panicked. Considius panicked, having panicked. Perteritum timore. Go ahead and translate it as having panicked, terrified by fear. Perteritum agrees with considium, having been terrified, scared, because of fear. He panicked. He freaked out. Yeah, this is the Latin for he freaked out. Considius freaked out. And having freaked out, he quod non vidicet proviso sibi renuntia visse, and he reported back renuntia visse. This is the perfect. He had reported back. Once again, perfect infinitive, so it's a prior action to Caesar learning about it. So the Helvetians have already broken camp. Considius had reported that which he had not seen as if he had seen it. And he had reported sibi to Caesar. He had reported to Caesar that which he had not seen as if he had seen it. And in the meantime, the hill is still being held. Present infinitive is still contemporaneously being held by his men. T-Lab is still there, waiting around, looking at the sundial on his wrist, tapping it, going like, what is going? Did I forget to change the batteries again? Finally, late in the day, through scouts, Caesar learned that the hill is being held, still being held by his men. The Helvetians have already broken camp, and Considius, having panicked, reported to him something that he had not seen as if he had seen it, proviso, as if something seen, having been seen. Something that he, vidicet, pluperfect, had not seen, as if he had seen it. I thought them was some Gallic insignia and weapons on that thar hill. Considius, you might be a little aged. Your eyesight might not be so good anymore. Anyway, he ruined Caesar's stratagem. I'm sure Caesar is pretty upset about that. Oh well, back to the drawing board. Eo die quo consuerat intervallo hoste sequitur, et milia passum tria ab eorum casris casraponet. So eo die, isea id, agreeing with die, ablative singular masculine. So on that day, which one? The one that we're talking about. On that day, quo consuerat intervallo hoste sequitur. Quo goes with intervallo. An intervallum is an interval, or it's a distance. You can say at which distance, quo intervallo, at which distance consuerat, he had been accustomed, from consuesco. At which distance he had been accustomed, he hoste sequitur. He sequitur, remember sequor, sequi, secutus sum, is a deponent verb, so it looks passive. Please translate it as active. Sequitur is present tense, probably a historical present. And on that day he follows the direct object enemy, at which interval he had been accustomed. So he picks up the march, follows the enemy at the distance which he consuerat had been accustomed, et milia passum tria. And milia passum, Milia goes with tria, 3,000 passuum of paces. This is probably going to be accusative plural neuter, milia tria. So 3,000, probably accusative of extent of distance, which shows the distance between something, or the distance traveled, shows how far the action of the verb extends. So 3,000 passuum is going to be the genitive plural, partitive genitive, 3,000 of paces. Ab eorum castris, ab preposition. We've seen this one a lot in this chapter as well. It's going to be personal agent if the voice is passive. It's not. The verb is active voice, ponent. So this is going to be ab separation, movement away from. So we are ab away from, eorum is genitive, castris is our ablative. From the camp of them, from their camp, their, from their camp. Castra ponent, castra, orum, always neuter, always plural. The accusative plural neuter direct object of ponent. And he, castra ponere, he to place camp, to pitch camp. It's the opposite of to castra movere, to move camp or break camp. So the subject is Caesar. So he sequitur the hostes, he follows the enemy, and he ponit castra, and he pitches camp, milia passuum tria, 3,000 of paces, that's 3 miles, ab eorum castris, from their camp, from the camp of them, meaning the Helvetians. Notice Caesar puts castris next to castra. The Romans like to do stuff like that, especially if they have them in different cases, to show antithesis like that. So eorum castris castra ponent. So from their camp, he puts his own camp. On the same day, he follows the enemy at which distance he had been accustomed, and he pitches camp 3 miles from the enemy camp.